Hello and welcome to Season 2 of Beyond Borders, a space for honest conversations where people, technology, art and mental health meet. We're here to explore what's changing, what matters and what it means to stay human in the middle of it all.
Hi guys, it's good to be back for another episode with Caroline and Pim. Today we'll discuss a common mental health disorder many creators struggle with. That's anxiety. This excessive worry and fear that often interferes with our daily lives and even serves as a breeding ground for self-doubt, imposter syndrome, and other disorders. I'm not talking about the normal nervousness that comes with doing a new task or bringing in a new place for the first time, but the kind that hinders job performance, schoolwork, creativity, and even relationships. It is my hope that at the end of today's episode, we would have shared how to manage anxiety for self-development and in the workplace. I'm thrilled to have you both here with me today, Caroline and Pim. So we'll get right into it. Anxiety is a normal reaction to external stress. We all experience it. In fact, we need a certain level of anxiety to function, as it can help us in some situations requiring caution and use of our survival skills. However, anxiety can easily graduate into a disorder and become a thorn in your flesh. For creators, it can hinder your ability to function properly, be productive, and ultimately lose any sense of self-confidence. And I'm eager to hear from both of you today. I will start off with Caroline. In your journey, have you had any experience with anxiety? What has that been like? Or do you struggle with anxiety, or is that something for emerging creators only?
Before I answer your question, I have to say, Sprenko, this episode really resonates with me because anxiety isn't something I've just studied or witnessed. It's something I've lived through. Many of us have. I've navigated it and still keep learning from it. So I'm super grateful that we're opening this space for this kind of honest conversation today. So thank you for that.
Mhm.
Um, I wish I could say that anxiety was something I've left behind early in the journey, but no, it's been a frequent visitor and companion, just in different guises. I think in my early years, it showed up as perfectionism and over preparing. And these
Mm,
days, it's more subtle, like the pressure to show up when I'm emotionally empty, or the fear that I'll disappoint people who believe in me. So, no, it's definitely not just for those starting out. The shape of anxiety just evolves.
I hear that loud and clear, Caroline, and I'm glad we're discussing this today because it can show up in different forms. And like you said, I'm eager to hear from Pim though. Why do you think we struggle with anxiety? Because I've dealt with anxiety for a while. I've taught on it, studied it, and according to the American Psychiatric Association, about 30% of adults struggle with anxiety disorders at least once in their lives. That's a large margin. So why do you think we struggle with anxiety? Different kind of people, different walks of life. What's your initial thought on that?
Well, I think it's very normal to have anxiety, definitely when starting new things. If you're an entrepreneur, if you're an employee or an artist, everybody has that. I think there are differences in the sense of how anxiety evolves or comes.
Mm,
For example, as an artist, you're looking for people who approve your work, who like your work, but finding that communication can be very hard because when you want to, let's say, defeat which might be very difficult and not doable at all for many people. But defeat anxiety is that you get people that assure you that your work is great and that you are valued, etc. As an artist, that can definitely in the beginning, they can be very difficult to perceive because there are no real communications. Your communication is on the web, and the likes and retweets or whatever can be nice, but not having sales or not having real conversations in person don't take away the anxiety. It might even just extends and develops the anxiety because before you sell any
mm,
work, or if you have a very hard time selling work, you're never sure if people like your art or people want to buy your art, but the moment you have,
Hmm.
for example, an exhibition and you speak to people and they say, well, I really like the art, I like how you do, how did you make it, and you can explain your processes and how you've done, that will might fade your anxiety to some extent. Of course, as an artist, you need to make a living, so you're looking for sales. But getting the value that people really say, okay, you make great art, keep doing it, that might already help. For, let's say, the business standpoint, as an employee, the first conversations can be very important to get anxiety, or just as an employer, remove possible anxiety. The beginning process from, let's say, the first hello to eventually sign the contract, if that takes a lot of time, your anxiety will just increase if you're a right fit or if you will be good enough
Mm.
for the job. If that's a very smooth and pleasant process, people will go more with a pleasant feeling towards their job and actually have a better idea. Okay, they hired me because they like me, they like what I can bring. So I am there and I will be fitting. Um, if that takes a long time, the first day in the office is like, okay, I'm finally here,
Mm.
and now, because you didn't have really a rest, you emotionally you got, let's say, more of a hit after hit because it took a longer time. Because financial stability is a great thing that people actually need to prosper for themselves, for to enjoy things, etc. So that's going to be a very important thing. Same for an entrepreneur. If your business starts and goes very slow and not how you imagined it, then you're going to question yourself: Is this the right business? Am I the right person for the business? Am I
Mm.
doing it correctly? So in many things, communications is the key. Just like with all things, and definitely when it comes to anxiety and taking away anxiety, getting communications, receiving communications, looking for communications is very important.
Yeah, I love that you mentioned that, especially with the workplaces. It's something we don't talk much about. You said something is very important, that the way we handle conversations can really change how we respond to them. Especially with like job interviews and hiring processes and all that. You could be very good at something, and the way the interview was handled can either dumb down your anxiety, or make it evolve. I hear that loud and clear. I've been there, and it was quite an interesting space. The way the CEO was calm and, accommodating compared to a previous employer who was, at first instant looking like, well, if you don't have the job done, then we don't need you here. So I think that's important that you mentioned that. But I want to check in with Carolyn. With all we've shared so far, do you have any thoughts on why anxiety, the normal anxiety that we are meant to have, that we deal with in our daily lives, could evolve into anxiety disorders, especially with work, especially with being a professional?
Absolutely. I think one of the biggest reasons is the invisible accumulation of stress. A little anxiety is natural, as we've said. It keeps us alert, but when the workplace doesn't allow for rest or boundaries or self-expression, that normal alertness can tip into chronic worry, especially, I think, in creative or digital roles where the boundaries between personal and professional are blurred. People carry pressure 24/7. That constant mental load rewires how safe or unsafe our bodies feel, even in still moments. And I have something to share here that may help listeners. That there is something called free floating anxiety. And what that means is that when we experience this accumulation of stress, we may actually be managing it, or at least on the surface, we appear to be managing it. We feel like we're managing it. But underneath, it's bubbling away. It's looking for an outlet. And this actually happened to me once back in the day. I was in a situation of intense work-related stress. I believed I was coping. I believed I was managing. I recognized that I was under stress, but I appeared to be doing everything. I was sleeping, I was getting up, I was eating, I was doing my job. But in amongst it all, there was intense stress. And then in amongst, I went on holiday. and I developed a fear of flying. And I'd flown for decades, long haul flights had never been an issue. And here I was on a short haul flight having a panic attack at 30,000 feet. And you kind of can't process that as somebody who didn't recognize really that the stress that she was under was causing difficulties. But it was later when I sought help for what had happened that I began to, have illuminated for me that the stress was just looking for an outlet. And it could have been anything. I could have developed a fear of spiders or, I don't know, trees, something really weird and wonderful. But it just so happened that flying was the thing that my anxiety attached to. So I think the message here is that sometimes, an anxiety can feel irrational. Why am I scared of flying? What is going on here? But actually, it was nothing to do with the flying. It was work-related stress. Does that make sense?
It does make a lot of sense, and I'm glad that you shared that piece with us, because it helps enlarge our conversation today. Recognizing anxiety disorders and triggers in our lives and in work environments. Because interestingly, like you've shared now, anxiety is more common than most people think. It's there. Sometimes we feel we've dealt with it and it's just underlying, settling,
Mm.
ruminating. And certain behaviors are evident of anxiety, right? They're indicators. But when we cannot identify these behaviors or responses, it becomes difficult to deal with. From general everyday worry and fear to completing tasks, agoraphobia, social anxiety. I used to struggle with that a lot. And even the anxiety that comes from being separated or disconnected from, a loved one or a familiar role, a job or environment. So I want to check in with Pim real quick here. In your experience, have you been able to spot when anxiety shows up in your daily life and how? What signs show up and that inform you that, oh, something needs to be done here. I'm dealing with anxiety and stuff like that.
For myself, it's easier in the sense of I know when I'm not sleeping fast. So when I lay in bed and it takes a long time and I just start thinking and looking at the ceiling instead of closing my eyes, I always know, okay, there is something on my mind that disturbs me. For anxiety and let's say business-wise, I'm always there to to give my opinion and think with everything because it's also what I really like doing. So is it the anxiety is more in the sense of was this the right choice, yes or no? Unfortunately,
Mm,
you only know that the moment the choice has been made and also made practical by in the processes, and in the end, you know if it was the right one, yes or no.
mm,
Spotting anxiety in, let's say, the business environment with others is simpler than spotting it for yourself, because people who are working with anxiety tend to be more silent during meetings. And definitely if they used to give their opinion a lot, if that stopped, it's always great to have a conversation with a person. Like I want to, for example, one-on-one, I want to know your opinion. And then
mm,
later on, your opinions are great. I like them. Discuss them to discuss how they would work in the process. And after that, why didn't you share it during the meeting? If then the answer comes, yeah, I wasn't sure if it was valued or if it was good enough. Well, there are a couple of things you will need to do. You need to make sure that that person feels valued in the business. I think that's step number one. And you could ask them, what do you prefer? Do you prefer to give them in an open meeting where everybody is around, or do you like to prefer them giving a one-on-one before the meeting so I discuss it in front of the group and see what people think? Those can be small solutions that actually take away, let's say, the stress and the pressure on that
mm,
person and so they keep telling their opinions and maybe their solutions or saying this is the problem because that is very important for processes that people of all departments, I would say, give their opinion and share where the problems might be about well or a solution might be. Limit them just on with the department is actually you never know where the solution comes from. So I'm always open in all ears to all solutions that all departments, even over other departments, are willing to share. So again, for myself, it's quite hard to spot. Uh, Definitely, I notice it when I go to sleep, um, and also in the fast. Let's say in the process, how fast everything goes. For my art, it's always also difficult in the sense I have spoken to people who really like my art, but when it comes to sales, sometimes it's a long dry spell. But then I always tell myself, is it worth doing even if it doesn't sell? Then the answer is yes, because I like to be creative, and then I
Hmm.
continue. So I think that's more of my opinion and how I spotted a yes or no on your question.
Yeah, that was a good one, Pim. And the way you shared, especially with in the workplaces, you could have people who usually speak up and suddenly, they're quiet in meetings, they're not showing up regularly. So that's a good catch. And Caroline, I'm curious as well, if you've been able to spot certain indicators of anxiety in your life, because our brain feels wired for negativity. That's what it is. It's like a default mode to prepare us to recognize and react to danger. So that means that, about 60% of the time, you may see the glass half empty and look for confirmation that you have it right, you have it figured out, and feel like you cannot do something or pass a challenge or you're not good enough, when in fact, you're more than capable of transforming your life. So, in your experience, how do you differentiate between natural caution and anxiety in your life?
Interesting question, Sprenko. For me, I think natural caution feels like a signal. And what I mean by that is it's clear, it's temporary, and it's specific. And that kind of signal keeps me safe, I've come to recognize, because sometimes I will delay acting or I will procrastinate over something. And I will find out down the road, but that was actually the right thing to do because something has happened, which shows me that that was the right thing to do. So I know there's kind of
Mhm.
an inner compass that I have that has that natural caution. It makes me pause.
Mm.
And I guess, without the sort of experience that I've amassed over a lifetime, I could interpret that as anxiety, but I've come to know that it isn't. Because anxiety for me, on the other hand, is more like noise. Loud, persistent, hard to pin down. I know I'm dealing with anxiety when fear spills into areas that don't need it. So, like I've done something 100 times before, but suddenly it feels like I'm failing at it. So, I've learned to pause and ask, is this fear or this anxiety serving me, or is it stealing something from me? And that's the difference. And it's like Pim described, lying in bed looking at the ceiling, not able to settle, not really able to sort of get a grasp of what it is that's causing you difficulty, but there's a difficulty. So there's a difference between natural caution, which is a signal and keeps us safe, and anxiety, which is, built up over time, is tugging away at us. Something that we're not dealing with wants to rise to the surface.
I like that share, Carolyn. Something that we're not dealing with wants to rise to the surface. Thank you both for those shares. It's very interesting because over the years, I've observed myself and others to identify causes of anxiety disorders, and the results have been insightful. And your shares right now have been, you know, in addition to those realizations, our brain activity can trigger anxiety disorders such that it becomes difficult to function without anxiety in the picture. I've had conversations with people who would say the anxiety, the brimming panic attack sorts of gets them to jolt into action, to take a step that they would naturally have procrastinated or not cared about. And like you've both mentioned, stress is a common factor for increased anxiety, especially among creators and multidisciplinary individuals. So one could be perfectly fine, like you've just shared, Caroline, with normal levels of anxiety and develop an anxiety disorder over time due to working in a toxic environment or exposure to certain chemicals that trigger anxiety. I've been a fair receiver of that. A toxic work environment made me question my actions, my thoughts, everything that I would normally do. And like Pim said earlier, even in meetings, I would normally share my thoughts and opinions and want to contribute to the growth and success of the project that we're working on. I would just keep quiet because anxiety is right there staring at me in the face saying, yo, you say something and it wouldn't make sense or they wouldn't find it useful. So some other things like you mentioned, insomnia, that staring at the ceiling, oh boy, very, very relatable. And excessive worry. Sometimes we panic too much. We feel like we're struggling to focus on a task. Paranoia, restlessness, sweaty palms, those can be really disturbing, especially when you have to give a speech to a large audience or you're doing something for the first time. In fact, it could even be online interviews, the 10-minute interview for work, and you're like sweaty, and the interviewer has to ask you, are you okay? Are you in a hot environment? And you're like, no, no, I'm just anxious. So those are some of the things that can show up and indicate to us that you're dealing with anxiety, you're struggling with anxiety, and depending on the frequency and intensity, it can be another indicator to maybe see a doctor or see a therapist or, go for something that could be really helpful. So I just want us to sort of step a little bit into how we can manage anxiety, how we can cohabit with anxiety, especially with anxiety disorders, so that we can still live a functioning life, so we can have increased productivity. The reality is, anxiety disorders can be treated. That excessive fear, that worry, it doesn't have to ruin our lives forever. Some diagnoses would require the use of medication like antidepressants or beta blockers. However, I prefer to lean more on the hands-on practices to manage anxiety, especially in the workplace, that will result in building a tolerance, and not introduce any form of side effects. So quickly before I share my pace, I want to check in with you and Pim. That can you share with uh, any impact on anxiety and how it has affected your productivity in your life and how you've been able to handle it successfully, Caroline? What practices have you taken on? What things do you do now similar to the fear of flight? How do you navigate that now to ensure that you have a functioning life and you go about your day productive?
I think realization and knowledge of these things helps immensely. If I think back to the past in terms of general anxiety in my life, I think I'd have to say that it hit hardest when I had too many tabs open, literally and mentally. I'd start five things and finish none, constantly second guessing myself, and I think we've talked about this in spaces many, many times. It's kind of what I do. I'm the archetypal plate spinner. I've them all going at the same time. But with hindsight, on time, the passage of time, I recognize the toll that takes on me personally. So what's helped me in practical terms is learning to zoom in. So instead of looking at the mountain or looking at all of these plates that are being spun, because I still do that, I focus on the next step now. What do I need to do today to move myself forward? What's the most important thing on the list? Doesn't mean to say that I deal with the thing that's on the top of the list. It may be on the bottom of the list, but it's the most important today, and I recognize that. I also kind of create rituals, which sounds a bit strange, but quiet starts to the day are important for me. I've recognized if I have to get out of bed and get out the door and, just get out as quickly as possible. That's is not a good day for me. I need time. So if that means setting the clock earlier so that I have the time I need to feel better, then that's exactly what I do. And I tend to do kind of grounding check-ins throughout the day, even naming anxiety when it arrives. So if by about 1 o'clock I'm feeling a bit overwhelmed, I've got meetings I'm going to or work I need to do, on things I need to schedule, I'll kind of just take a breath, take a minute and cool down and calm down and recognize where the anxiety lives. It lives in the fact there's too many plates spinning. And I'll just say something like, ah, there you are again, and just breathe into it and work through it rather than fight it because you can't fight it. You know, it is who I am, it is what I do, it is how I work. What I've got to find a way is to manage the feelings as they come up. And that's what I tend to do. I hope that helps.
Yes, it does help a lot. Because as you mentioned that, especially with the slowing down in the mornings, it just exactly sits in my alley because that's what I've been doing lately, the past year. Wake up in the morning, get a nice workout in. Ironically, helps calm me down,
Mm,
sets me in that mental health space where I'm like, okay, I'm ready to take on the day. And like you said, with the listicle, what am I supposed to do today? It's not about the one at the top of the list, but the most important, the easiest to get to sometimes, the easiest to get to. I just start off there and gradually knock things off my to-do list, and that helps. Some
mm,
other things with stress management. I identify that, oh, I'm getting worked up now. I'm getting agitated. I'm feeling tensed. I slow down, I cancel my Uber, take a few minutes, order a new one, and remind myself that I'm okay, right? I'm
mm,
going for this interview because I was invited. I didn't beg for it. And sometimes I try to limit and avoid the trigger. So I identify things that would naturally spike anxiety and I try to avoid them, ensure that I'm not inviting them in any shape or form. And also conversations with trusted friends, they've been really helpful, I must say. Sort of talking with a good boss, let them know that you're feeling some type of way, how can they help? And having supportive colleagues can be really helpful. It helps to know that you're not alone. You're not the only one struggling with a certain task at work. You're not the only one feeling the pressure from the last floor, and just to ensure that we are not avoiding it, but we are combating it. So I'm curious to hear from Pim though. A lot of people get prescribed medications straight up. Oh, I'm dealing with anxiety, take these pills, take that pill, take this. And yeah, it helps, but sometimes, a lot of times even, there's side effects. You're getting more depressed, you relying on those medications. What are your thoughts on medication over solutions like psychotherapy, for anxiety? Do you have any thoughts on that? And what was your preferred recommendation?
First of all, just to make it clear, I'm not a doctor or a psychologist.
Mm-hmm.
But I'm always, when it comes to medicine, a little bit cautious because, of course, when there's pain medicine, even then, it's good for pain treatment. But then being relying on it, it does have large disadvantages, which which you actually want to prevent. Same for all these antidepressants and what they prescribe to everyone nowadays. I think getting a call with a psychologist first and a conversation and an intake and go through that process, I think that's step one.
Right.
Step two, to be honest, because first your step one is to talk with friends, talk with family, talk with your boss, talk with your colleagues to see if that already helps. But
Mm-hmm.
then if it doesn't help, get an appointment with your psychologist and start talking about it and see what a kind of solution they advise. And
Mm-hmm.
I'm not sure if they will immediately here in the Netherlands go to medications. I think some countries might do that earlier, but I'm not sure.
Mm.
Always, I think getting through a treatment, can be quite wide nowadays without medication, is more preferred also because you skip on the relying on medication part. You're really working on yourself instead of getting that
Right.
medication to fix it for you. Because if
Mm-hmm.
you feel better and you stop with that medication, what then? Does it come back? Because for your, let's say, your inner mind, you didn't change. You just got the medication and it did the job for you. But if you stop with medication, what then? So I'm not really in big favors of medication in regards to your mind. Um, So yeah, follow the steps, go into intakes with a psychologist and a doctor and see what they do. And if they, from the start, advise you to take medication, ask why and ask if there's other solutions to start and trying beforehand. I think that's my advice.
Right, that's right head on. Um, yeah, I'm saying that because, like we know, anxiety doesn't happen to everyone the same way, but there's definitely an aspect that is common for almost everybody. You know, that fear of rejection, failure, mediocrity, disappointment, or even fear of going broke, can keep you from your next big dream or next daily achievement. The silent, hidden fear that you may have never even acknowledged in yourself. The one that tells you that that task, that project, that goal is too big to achieve, you're not good enough. The one that makes you feel you're not ready for that job. It sure did me, but thank God we're here, right? So the next time you feel anxiety pulling you away from your creative work or life, I want you to consider this. You're trying to escape from your potential and success. Do not let anxiety do that. It's only a fear of going beyond. It's not stopping you. It's not reminding you that you're not good enough because you are. So, if there's anything you both could leave us with today, what would that be? Pim, Carolyn.
I think I'd say anxiety doesn't mean you're broken. I think we've covered enough ground today to,
Mm.
share that message with everybody. Just means your nervous system is paying attention, but sometimes it's tuned in to the wrong station and you can retune it. Don't wait for everything to feel calm because, as you've just shared, Sprenko, that's procrastination that stops you moving forward and achieving your goals. So just begin gently with whatever calm you can find. And remember, your work, your voice, your presence, it matters, even when you're anxious, maybe especially then.
Right. Pim, anything
Yeah.
for us?
Yeah, so not a lot to add. Yeah, communicate. Communicate why you're anxious. Communicate this with your friends, family, partner, boss, employees, or whatever. And as an artist as well, try to find people who explain why they like your art, for example. There's even on X, if they, oh, I really like it, okay, nice. What do you specifically like about it, or what do you don't like about it? That can also be a conversation starter, which might help. And the rest, all what Caroline said, there isn't much to add, to be honest.
Well, there you have it, guys. And a very interesting episode. And if you've enjoyed this episode, let us know in the comments and on social media. We're always happy to read from you. And until next time, have an anxiety free journey. Thank you and bye bye.